You are outside, and the cold is not the kind you can shake off by moving faster. Your breath freezes the second it leaves your mouth. Your hands are wrapped in raw animal hide, but the wind still finds every gap, every loose fold, every place where the skin isn't sealed against your body. You know that if you can't fix this, tonight kills you. So you sit down, take a sliver of bone sharpened to a point, and you start pushing sinew through hide, pulling the material tight against your skin instead of just draped over it. Your fingers are numb, and this is slow work, but somewhere in that motion is the difference between surviving this winter and not. That's not a guess about the past. It's something we can actually trace, tool by tool, site by site, all the way back tens of thousands of years to the invention of something so small most people never think about it, the needle. Start with the object that changed the timeline. In 2016, researchers working in Denisova Cave in the Altai Mountains of Siberia announced the discovery of a needle carved from bird bone, complete with a fully drilled eye for thread, dated to roughly 50,000 years old. It's one of the oldest sewing needles ever found anywhere on Earth. This wasn't a random scrap of bone. Someone had shaped it, smoothed it, and bored a hole through one end precisely, so thread could pass through it. The same basic design still used in sewing needles today. That's needle count, the running tally for this video, and it starts at 50,000 years, in a cave in Siberia, in some of the harshest cold on the planet. Here's what that needle actually made possible. A needle with an eye lets you do something a simple bone awl can't. An awl just punches a hole. A needle pulls thread through that hole in one motion, which means you can join pieces of hide together with tight, controlled seams instead of just tying or draping material over your body. That distinction matters more than it sounds like, because tight seams are what stop wind and cold air from getting in. This is the difference between wearing a hide like a blanket and wearing a hide like a coat. We can actually see the result of that shift in a burial site far from Siberia. At Sungir, in Russia, archaeologist Otto Bader excavated burials in the 1950s and 60s dated to around 34,000 years ago, containing skeletons covered in thousands of small ivory beads. The beads weren't scattered randomly. Their positioning on the bodies traces the outline of fitted clothing, including what looked like tailored trousers, shirts, and hats, sewn directly onto the garments the beads once decorated. That's needle count moving forward again. A second site, a different part of the world, showing the physical outline of sewn, fitted clothing on real human remains. Here's where it gets stranger, because we actually have a comparison group. Neanderthals lived through Ice Age cold too, for hundreds of thousands of years, and they made sophisticated tools. At the sites of Abri-Péronne and Pech-de-la-Zay in France, researchers led by archaeologist Marie Soresi identified specialized bone tools called lissoirs, used for softening and polishing hide, dated to around 50,000 years ago, some of the oldest specialized bone tools associated with Neanderthals. But here's the gap. Across the entire Neanderthal archaeological record, no eyed needles have been found. Neanderthals were working hide, but there's no evidence they were sewing it into tailored fitted garments the way Homo sapiens were doing at almost exactly the same time, in the same general climate. This is the single biggest wait really moment in this video. Two different human species living through the same Ice Age cold, and only one of them appears to have invented the eyed needle. Some researchers, including archaeologist Ian Gilligan, have connected this exact gap to survival outcomes. Fitted, sewn clothing traps body heat far more effectively than draped hides, and that difference in cold weather survival is one of several factors researchers have discussed as playing a role in why Homo sapiens were able to expand into colder environments that stayed largely out of reach for Neanderthals. Needle count doesn't just climb here, it becomes a dividing line between two entire species. And here's where it gets stranger again, because clothing itself is older than any needle we've found. In 2003, researchers Ralph Kittler, Manfred Kayser, and Mark Stoneking at the University of Leipzig studied the genetic divergence between human head lice and human body lice, which live specifically in clothing. Their analysis estimated that body lice, and therefore clothing itself, split off as a distinct population roughly 170,000 years ago. That means humans were already wearing some form of clothing well over 100,000 years before the Denisova needle was ever made. The needle didn't invent clothing. It made clothing far more effective, and that upgrade arrived right around the coldest, harshest stretch of the Ice Age. That timing isn't a coincidence either. Ian Gilligan's research connects the spread of eyed needles and tailored clothing to the last glacial maximum, the coldest peak of the last Ice Age, roughly 26,000 to 19,000 years ago. Fitted, sewn clothing shows up in the archaeological record right as temperatures were dropping hardest, and it's around this same window that humans were pushing into Siberia and eventually across into the Americas, territory that simply isn't survivable in draped hides alone. Needle count closes here, at the edge of the Ice Age's worst cold, right where the evidence says people needed it most. One more site adds to that pattern. At Xiaogushan, in northeastern China, archaeologists recovered a bone needle dated to somewhere between roughly 30,000 and 40,000 years old. Another independent piece of evidence that this technology wasn't invented once in one place and slowly spread. It's showing up in different regions, among different populations, all converging on the same basic solution to the same basic problem. So this wasn't a minor craft skill. A sharpened, eyed needle let people turn loose animal hide into something that actually sealed against the body, held in warmth, and kept out wind and snow. That upgrade shows up right when the climate got hardest, right in the populations that went on to survive it. And it's largely missing from the one closely related human species that didn't make it through the Ice Age at all. Go back to that person outside, hands numb, pushing bone through hide in the freezing dark. They weren't just making clothing. They were closing the gap between their body and a climate that would kill them the moment it found a way in. Every stitch was a small argument against the cold, and enough of those arguments, repeated night after night across thousands of years, is part of the reason any of us are here to talk about it. Humans didn't just survive the Ice Age. They sewed their way through it, one hole in one piece of bone at a time. If a needle helped one species survive an Ice Age that wiped out our closest relatives, it's worth asking what other small, easy-to-overlook tools quietly decided who made it and who didn't.